when I look over that period of time, that 50 years that Sam existed in my life, when you transpose it over that time period, our world here in Maine has dramatically changed. It was a place everyone wanted to come. This quality of life that was here, this beautiful environment, this ability for the individual in a state with only 1 million people to make a difference in their government has changed dramatically. And we're becoming more and more like Washington politics, where everything is driven by money and power.
David Trahan, thank you very much for joining us in the studio.
Sure, thanks.
You've been involved in Maine politics for a long time. First ran for the state legislature in 1998, but I think people know you best as these days as the director of the Sportsmans Alliance of Maine. Yep. I think you're here today speaking in your own capacity as someone who knows the ways, the norms, the traditions, and the procedures of the State House, and have been carefully following some of the legislation that would affect sportsmen, gun owners, the people, civil rights of the people of the state of Maine. And I think that there's a controversy right now over one of these bills to limit and curtail Mainers' civil rights. And there's some procedural deviations that are going on. And you've had a front row seat to watch this. So I think that our viewers, listeners would really like to hear about what's going on. But to begin with, just give me a little bit of background on you and your connections with the Maine. What drew you to the Sportsman's Alliance and sporting in Maine, and eventually into politics?
Sure. Well, for those that don't know what I did for a living, for 41 years I was a self-employed logger. I had the old-fashioned cable skidder, the chainsaw, and I worked in the woods, either full-time or part-time, for all 41 years. And
so you're like Troy Jackson. You guys were loggers who got drew into politics? Oh, no, you didn't do the disability claims on the property owners.
I did. I think he more used automated equipment. I did it the old-fashioned way, the most dangerous job in the world. Get your chainsaw out, you cut a 35-inch pine tree, and you drop it down through the trees and hope you don't get killed. That was my job for 41 years. And I think that job helped shape who I am today. Incredibly independent, pretty tough-minded on things when I think something's right and needs to be fixed. It's pretty hard to intimidate me. When you're dodging death every day in your job and you go to the State House, it's pretty hard to intimidate somebody that's living in that environment. So I think it helped shape who I am today. I still have both my skidders, and they're kind of lonely down in the field now, but I'll always have them till I die. I just love working in the woods. Somehow it just energizes your spirit to be in the woods, to do that kind of hard work, and at the end of the day, you don't owe anybody but yourself.
So that's interesting to me, because it's a job where there's a lot of solitude, and you'd have to get very comfortable with solitude and being in your own mind and being by yourself. Yes. That's not politics.
No, it isn't. Politics is the complete opposite, but it's what you just described is what led to me getting into politics. I was almost into Friendship, Maine. I was on my lunch break. I read the newspaper, and I was getting more and more frustrated as I saw people in Augusta not speaking for the people. And I had never been in politics. I had no interest in it. I'm sitting there one day, I'm reading the paper, and I'm cussing like probably most of your listeners are when they see what's going on in politics. And I just looked up from the paper and said, all right, I'm tired of complaining. I'm going to run. How do I do that? And so locally, the Bagley family, one was a senator, one was a state representative, and they agreed to help me.
And what district was this in?
It was in Lincoln County, the Senate district, which I ended up serving in, and then the Waldoboro district. I lost track; they changed the numbers in a few years, but it's Abden Simmons House district.
Okay,
I held that for 4 years, and I held the Senate seat for 2. And so, what was odd about that, though, is I'd never had any political experience. I didn't even know who the local Republican Party was, and as soon as I said that I was going to run, Chuck Bagley, who was a former senator, said, "You're that little troublemaker from North Waldoboro. I'd love it if you'd consider running." I had written some.
So you already had a reputation.
Well, I had written in the newspapers, and it was coming from the perspective of somebody who didn't care about whether you were in one party or the other. I was just frustrated with the system, and I was writing these columns, and he said, "Oh, you're the David Trahan in the newspaper."
Well, Was it like sporting related issues
No,
that you
it
initially were concerned
it was
with?
more
Or?
tax issues. It was burdens on business. You know, I had this logging business, and it seemed to me at the time that the government was doing nothing but putting obstacles in the way to me running my business. And when your wife is a ed tech at school and you're a logger, your income level's pretty thin. But I loved it, and so she loved her job. And I'm like, why are you fighting so hard to make me go on welfare or to not even hold my job at all anymore? So I said, enough is enough. I'm going to go to Augusta, and I'm going to cause a ruckus. I didn't expect to win, to be honest with you. And I was running against a local Democrat activist reporter, Steve Cartwright. And
An activist reporter?
Yes, he was absolutely an activist.
Who's ever heard of such a thing?
Well, he worked for the Courier and others. He wrote. Anyway, I ended up beating him pretty handily. And from then, pretty much all of my elections, I won pretty handily. And I think the reason is because I say it like it is. I don't do the political double talk that most of them do. If you ask me a question, I'm going to give you an answer. And sometimes you're going to like it and sometimes you're not. And even Democrats at the time in the district said to me, that's what we like about you. I don't have to wonder where you are.
Well, and this too, I think was a time when the Democratic Party in Maine and nationally was really different. So most of your service would have been under Governor Baldacci.
Yeah, and under Senator
Governor Baldacci, like by today's standards, would be a Tea Party radical.
Yeah, he's conservative.
He's so far to the right of Janet Mills that I mean, he's to the right of some Republican senators.
Yes, and I did serve under Angus King for a term, but you're right. Most of my honing my teeth in politics was under Baldacci, and back then there was more of a, I hate to use it, but a good old boy system where it was the end of the pulp and paper industry's influence over the legislature, and there was a strong rural component to the legislature. John Martin was still there. He had a stranglehold on a lot of the activities at the State House.
You see this poster, this cartoon up behind me?
Yes.
This is from the Bangor newspaper, and John Martin. The camera can't see it, but it's got all of the eminent political figures from Maine political history. John Martin's on there. That cartoon was made in 1989, before I was born.
Yeah, well,
and he was already an eminent figure in Maine politics, and just lost his last election really in November.
I think it was mostly because of his health, but the
I mean, stroking out and falling in your driveway is not a salubrious to your political career.
It makes me feel really old, just so you know.
Sorry,
but it does illustrate how quickly things have changed in Maine. Once the pulp and paper industry lost its hold on power, it was just kind of willy-nilly. The environmentalists backfilled conservation policy in most of the rural parts of the state. That influence, that power that I think rural Maine had has completely flipped. Now all the power is Portland South.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's easy to forget that, somebody going to high school in Millinocket, and Dexter used to play sports against Stearns, and we'd go up there and see the size of their school, and it's a Class A school. Now it's got a Class D population.
Right.
And someone graduating from Millinocket High School 20 or 30 years ago could go get a job at the mill, sweeping a floor for $25, $30 an hour, not inflation adjusted, like real jobs. Yeah. You could do that for a career and have a nice house, raise a family of 4 or 5, and then I'll have a lake cabin with a bunch of snowmobiles and 4-wheelers and everything. There was a lot of economic power, not just political power, being wielded by the people at the top of the pulp and paper companies.
Yeah, and you nailed the influence component, but what also aligns, and this led to my political career, is I was a teenager. Sam, this year is its 50th birthday. And a young lady, Ginny Hurley, now Ginny Thompson, and I are writing a book about the history of the Sportsmans Alliance of Maine. And it's dramatic, the difference from 50 years ago to today. But for me personally, I grew up in that rural Maine. I used to hunt in northern Maine when there was a big forest and a big population of deer. I remember it. Now it's the opposite. I was there.
Well, what do you mean by that?
Well, back when I was a kid, the forest products industry was made up of basically what I did for 40 years: small machinery, light cuts. Then along came the Sportsmans Alliance of Maine on the heels of some of the most political unrest in our country's history. Assassinations of presidents and just Martin Luther King. In came the Sportsman's Alliance of Maine at the end of that very tumultuous political era. In addition, the state was changing. It was moving from the pulp and paper industry to what it is today, which is now driven mostly by a liberal agenda, driven a lot by out-of-state money, with those elected people in populated areas controlling everything, which has completely flipped the identity of the state of Maine.
Well, I guess what I more meant was the difference of the forest that you,
Okay.
that you grew
forest?
up hunting.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know.
The forest now mostly is a commercial forest where you have rotations every 15 years and you cut it heavy.
Yeah.
That has impacts on your environment. We're transitioning from that now into renewable energy development, solar, wind power. The whole state is changing. The organization I represent is the only one, and I want to speak to this because I think your listeners could learn something from it. Our organization is the only one advocating for wildlife and water to the point where we're introducing legislation to get the solar industry under control. We've had 2 bills to do that. And ironically, because Maine is still, its value of its land is minimal compared to out of state where land is precious. Up here, you can buy land cheap. You can buy an old farm with a nice big field and put solar in it.
Or a Chinese marijuana grow.
Or a Chinese marijuana grow.
But yeah, the price of land in the unorganized
that's
territory and some of the rural areas
that's
is
because,
inexpensive, but it's increasing in price.
Yeah, it is. But what isn't there is the asset which used to be the trees.
Yeah.
Because it's really just a 15-year-old to 20-year-old forest. There's not high-value logs. So these bigger landowners are looking at how to raise money, and one of them is to develop solar.
And so, I guess, how much old-growth forest is left in Maine?
Well, you can measure that by how much deer wintering area is left in northern, eastern, and western Maine. Used to be around 14 to 15% older forest. Now it's 3%. Okay. It's gone.
It's like Gulf Haggis and
yeah,
maybe some other areas.
Yeah. Well, that, forests will grow back, but once you flatten it, you de-stump it, and you put in a solar field.
You change it, yeah.
Yeah,
you
it's not coming
you
back.
change the characteristics of the ecology.
But this is why this is important to your listeners. When I had a bill this session to look at the heat generated by solar arrays. It's massive. They create their own heat islands.
Oh, hold on. I thought the solar panels were supposed to reduce global temperatures.
No. A solar panel will get on a hot day up to 150 degrees. You can cook your breakfast on that. What happens is they're so inefficient that they release most of that heat back into the environment. Well, they were putting these solar arrays right up into the wetlands, right on the edges of the wetlands. There's a recommendation for a 100-foot setback. That wasn't being followed. So they were building these solar arrays right up to the water line. And
but these are environmentalists who are advocating for
the
solar subsidies and who are developing the solar
You've got it, Steve.
companies. So why would environmentalists be imposing policies that are detrimental to the environment?
Well, the League of Conservation Voters, because what this bill did was it required the DEP to monitor the heat generated and establish setbacks, basically, to stay away from the water, to keep it from heating up.
Just to study how to protect the environment while installing these solar panels.
It's really just responsible development that protects the resource. Well, what happened was the League of Conservation Voters and the DEP came in and testified against the bill, which I have to be honest with you, almost blew my head off my shoulders. I was like, wait a minute.
So the League of Conservation Voters testified against a bill that would have conserved wetlands.
Yes, and would have saved wetlands, because once you've heated them up and they get filled with algae, they're done. They're gone.
I was going to say that's
great.
I mean, I think even somebody who's made it through Maine's education system can understand evaporation. And
they can understand that a brook trout in a cold water stream is not going to take a 15-degree temperature increase in their environment. So my point, though, is that environmental groups have, back in the 50 years ago, back when I was a kid and SAM was created, they were a different group of organizations. They were truly, in my mind, even though I didn't agree with a lot of what they were doing, they thought that their mission was to save the environment. Well, now their mission has changed to global warming is the number one issue. And yes, we're willing to allow some of the environment to be destroyed because we think the world's going to end with global warming.
Yeah.
Well, what I said to
you think that they've really made the
Yes.
calculation that the destruction is worth it? Because I've kind of played around with this idea that maybe they don't know about the destructive
No.
characteristics of solar or wind or some of these
They don't want to
green
know.
energy schemes.
They know as well as I do that offshore wind, Audubon, for instance, I criticized them heavily, their lobbyists, because they were supporting offshore wind without knowing the detrimental impacts of it. Kathleen Breen, former senator, she's now lobbying.
I think she's a Robinson Report subscriber, by the way.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
she's the lobbyist for the League of Conservation Voters. She was the one that testified, and I spoke to her prior, and she told me she was going to speak against it. And she told me in that discussion and in her testimony that the issue of global warming was bigger and more important than what I was bringing forward. And my answer to that was, it's not one or the other. You can have both. You just have to be willing to look at the detrimental impacts. And so what happened was the committee heard my testimony, which was very powerful. It laid out the fact that these solar units were generating massive amounts of heat. They're a commercial industrial power plant. Call it what it is. You can call it renewable energy for your PC bull that you put out there, but that's what it is.
It's cadmium telefluoride.
Yeah.
There's PFAS in them.
Yes.
There's rare earth minerals in them.
Nobody's even looking at the impacts of the fences that surround them and what they do to wildlife, the heat that's generated by them. And so I brought that to the attention of the committee, and they absolutely agreed with me, and they rejected former Senator Breen. They rejected the DEP and instituted mandatory setbacks. And now they're working with the university to find out how hot they get and whether those setbacks should be even further.
Okay, so this was a successful legislation.
Yes, it was successful.
So how is that going to affect the thousands of acres of solar panels
Well,
that have already been installed?
Well, this is actually going to stop them from doing it in certain places. There's a power line going into northern Maine, a renewable energy corridor.
A proposed
that
one.
Troy
I think
Jackson.
LS
Yes.
Power recently abandoned the corridor because
We
it
were
was
partly responsible for that one,
Yeah.
too, because we got another bill passed.
It's a controversial project.
Well, not only that, LD 1881, I believe, is the LD number Sam introduced 2 years ago that required mitigation for impacts on wildlife habitat. So in other words, if you are building in a deer yard, you got to pay. That was to disincentivize building in wildlife habitat and push them elsewhere. It also included farmland. So if you were developing solar in important farmlands, you had to pay or go elsewhere. So that slowed them down, took some of their profit.
I think people can understand that. I mean, you can eat a potato or a blueberry. You can't eat a solar panel.
No, and they keep talking about putting sheep in with these solar units. Well, if you didn't,
Oh, I've seen that.
Yeah.
That's a very very creative marketing on their part.
It is, and they call it
Yeah.
creative farming. But the truth of the matter is, they have to spray, they have to use diesel fuel.
Oh,
to mow.
I've actually filed a Freedom of Access Act request with the Department of Transportation for all of the pesticides and herbicides and all the chemicals that they've bought for these solar panel facilities. So if they're bringing in goats to maintain the brush, I wonder why they're spending so much money on these toxic chemicals.
Absolutely. So my point is that the traditional environmental groups that should be out there advocating for these things are not. And our organization, the Sportsmans Alliance of Maine, that I am leading, is the one that is spearheading it. We do have some support from the Nature Conservancy, Maine Coast Heritage Trust, and a few others, but it was us who initiated it. We brought the issue to the legislature, and other more left-leaning environmental groups seem to be standing in the way of a lot of the information getting out there. And that's not good for Maine. It's not good for Maine in 50 years.
So they've made this calculation that the solar panels, the wind turbines, all of these green energy subsidies, crony capitalism is good even if it results in ecological destruction in Maine because we're going to control global weather.
Right.
Have we done any studies, or is there any evidence? Do we know how much are Maine's efforts lowering the temperature of the planet?
Well, Maine will do nothing to lower the temperature. Actually, what we're doing now is increasing it.
I mean, I believe we're net negative because of the amount of forested land,
Right.
and the lack of any industry or people in the state.
This is the issue, though. Because Massachusetts and other states in New England have used up their lands, they've developed them, they don't have places to go to get their credit for renewable energy development, so they have to come to Maine.
Yeah, so I guess before we get into that, we should establish the background of RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is legislation where all the New England states get together and basically create this artificial made-up economy for renewable energy credits. So when you put your solar panels up, you're not just doing it to sell the electricity or to save the planet. You're doing it because you get a little imaginary credit that you can go sell to a company in Massachusetts or Connecticut or whatever, and they can use those as carbon offsets. And it's all mandated by law, and it's all just like completely made-up bullshit. Kind imposed on Maine's. Yes, really. It's just completely made up, distorts the economy, distorts the value of land use.
Why they're doing that is because Massachusetts wants credit for that renewable energy. They want to be able to say we're 80% renewable energy. Well, unfortunately, they want to do it on our back. They want to come to Maine, buy up cheap land, develop, and send almost 50% of the energy out of state. I ask you, why in the world would Maine politicians give our energy away? Because the only real financial commitment they make is to help build the corridor into northern Maine. And then they, from that point on, get that energy delivered back to Massachusetts. Well, it's like, 20% of a dollar is 20 cents, right? Well, 20% of $50 in 20 years, how much is that? Yeah. That always goes up. So what happens is Massachusetts gets more and more of this renewable energy, and they don't have to pay for it. Maine people wake up. We're giving away our land. We're blocking it off for wildlife. We're heating up our water so Massachusetts can feel good in meeting their renewable credits or whatever they want.
And we're going to be on the hook for the remediation of the land.
Right.
And a lot of these wind turbines, and I'm sure it's the same with the solar panel facilities. It's not like you have, Maine Wind, and Maine Wind owns all these wind turbines. There's an individual LLC formed for each tower.
That's right.
That way, liability is limited for each of these. So if one of them starts a forest fire, it doesn't affect the revenue of the other towers or the company that ultimately owns them. Right. And I would look 15 or 20 years into the future, whose responsibility is it going to be to clean up the wind turbines and the solar panels?
Well, it's
nobody in
not
Massachusetts.
Gonna be Massachusetts ratepayers. But my point is that we could reduce the amount of renewable energy development in Maine if we just said our goals are to meet Maine's energy needs.
Yeah.
Massachusetts.
We generate none of our own electricity. It's New Brunswick and Seacoast Nuclear.
Yeah. Massachusetts, build a nuclear power plant. You can get your energy that way, or you can develop wind offshore, whatever you want to do to develop, but leave Maine alone because they're going to gobble up our state. Land, they don't make it every day. It's only a set amount of land. And
except for in Dubai. Sometimes in Dubai, they're making a little bit of land.
Well, up here in Maine, we aren't making it. And every time you take a block and you put it into solar without being smart about how you do it, so that Massachusetts can take almost half the energy, you're gobbling up Maine. And eventually we're going to be in the same place these other states are. No place to go.
And we've done the research on the developers who are licensed under the community solar program, which is just a tax. Yeah. It's a tax collected by CMP and Versant through higher electricity rates to subsidize solar development. Mm-hmm. And 88% of the companies in solar development are not based in Maine. Yeah. It's Massachusetts, New York, Minnesota, California. These are primarily financial companies, really. And they're not even, they're buying solar panels that are mostly manufactured in China, including by companies that were sanctioned by the Biden administration for using Uyghur slave labor. They're from, the companies themselves aren't in the United States often. And even the contractors that they hire aren't necessarily coming from Maine. So to your point, it's what aspect of all of this benefits?
We're being mined for our resources.
Yeah, it really feels like like
rush, really.
There's like a vampiric sucking going on the necks of Mainers.
And to me, that's the danger to our state. Now, 50 years ago, the issues were different. When SAM was created, I was a kid. I was an active sportsman. I needed to be outside. I needed to be doing those things. That's who I am. Well, when SAM was created, it was mostly because we were under attack by by urban reporters. There was a hit piece done against hunters, and from that hit piece developed the Sportsmans Alliance of Maine. And then through those years, our organization has broadened its scope beyond just hunting and firearms to pretty much land conservation. I do far more work in land conservation than I do anything else. And isn't it funny that a logger would be leading a conservation type organization?
Well, that's, I think, a common misconception that some people have is that forestry is about, pillaging the earth and leaving nothing behind. Like smart forestry is it's a renewable
and
industry.
It feeds manufacturing, and that's where the money is. Now,
and it also creates biodiversity because new growing habitats allow different animals to come in, as opposed to if something was just, a pure, untouched, pristine wilderness like Maine was maybe 1,000 years ago.
Well, let's transition into my political career, because I think there's value in talking about how it's changed from when I was elected. You seem to know more when I was elected than I did. 1998, was that what it was?
1998. And also, I would say, since you brought up that you served a term under Angus King, and as the executive director of the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine, I know you're speaking in your personal capacity right now, but on behalf of the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine, would you like to apologize for Sam endorsing Angus King? Because
well, it wasn't
historians of Maine politics widely credit Sam's endorsement as a very influential organization with starting his career, and look where that has got us.
Well, we gave him an F. I gave him an F in his last election.
Well, it's too late. The cat's out of the bag. He won that gubernatorial bid, and the rest is history.
Well, there's a difference, though, in leadership. When I grade somebody, I grade them on their actions, and I can't say what happened back then, but I know that when I looked at what he was doing with gun issues, I gave him an F. Probably didn't make him very happy, but it is what it is.
I mean, I don't think he worried too much about it, because he was stacking the cash from the Roxbury wind farm that he was invested in.
Well, for me, the politics, though, that I brought to the legislature, I was known as kind of a wild card. You never knew where I was going to be. And so I approached it from the perspective of the people that elected me are the only ones that matter. And my personal feelings, they knew them, because I always shared them with my constituents, and they knew where I was coming from. So when I get up there, I really ticked off some people, and I made some people happy that like to see somebody calling a spade, which I did. And I remember.
I was gonna say, are these names people would remember?
Yes, Josh Tardy was assistant leader. I think the first time that, and Josh will tell you, he's probably still got the note.
And for those who aren't aware, Josh now, I would say, probably the most powerful Republican lobbyist.
Yes, that's right.
Very influential figure.
He is.
And isn't he on the Governor Mills Judicial Selection Committee?
Yes,
in some regards. So just a very well-connected guy who's. I think he was a lawyer for Terrio's recount, has been a very powerful force in Republican politics for a long time.
Well, our organization, in full disclosure, uses Josh. We used him in the 72-hour challenge that just was initiated along with some of our partners. We're going to do a challenge to not having a public hearing on the red flag. Josh will be our attorney. I've known Josh for years. I like him, consider him a friend, but I'll never forget it.
Well, in full disclosure, Josh helped a relative of mine stay out of prison for a real long time. He ended up doing just I think a couple of months, when he probably should have done several years.
Yeah, well, Josh is a good lawyer, and I remember him sending a note, and it said on it that I was voting the wrong way. I can't repeat what I said in the note back to him, but I remember him turning around with a big smile on his face, and a little later in the day he said, I'm going to keep that, so when you run for governor, I'm going to show the people that you told me what
Bleep
to do
off.
with it. Bleep off.
This is great. So this would have been before text messages. So
yes,
nowadays that would have been you'd have been able to FOA that.
Yeah. Well, what I told him is, if I ever run for governor and you make that public, it probably would help me. So anyway, from that point on, nobody ever bothered me. The lobbyists kind of left me alone. They knew I was going to do my thing. And sometimes I'd get up and give a speech that people didn't like, but it was the truth. And it could be a Republican or a Democrat issue, but I always felt like I was trying to do the right thing. Well, lo and behold, I've won 4 House races and 2 Senate races. And when they polled the Senate districts the first time I ran, I had the highest approval rating from all parties in the state as candidate. I think I earned that. When when I would take on an issue, it was because it came from the heart and I thought it was the right thing to do. Well, that is not what our politics, the only reason I bring that up, I'm not bragging, I'm not stroking my ego. What I'm saying is, I think that's what the legislature is supposed to be. And now it has dramatically changed into really being managed by out-of-state money. It's individuals wanting to move up the ladder in politics, chasing money. And most of that big money is coming from out of state. People that it's almost impossible to track down who they are. They flow their money through dark money, foundations and through sources of funding that can give money to campaigns and be hidden. And
I would just add there, in full disclosure, the Maine Wire, the Robinson Report, we're part of the Maine Policy Institute, which is a 501c3.
Yep.
And we don't disclose our donors. We have disclosed some of them, but my perspective on that is that it's our donors' prerogative if they want to disclose supporting us.
Sure.
And I view it as a matter of protecting them from some of the worst elements of politics. We've seen political violence, very real political violence.
And I was going to follow up on that with that's the system that's been built.
Yeah.
And if you want to compete in that system now, you either have to do the same thing. It's like a nuclear arms race.
Yeah, mutually assured money in politics.
That's right,
yeah.
and that's.
But hold on a second, we passed the Maine Clean Elections Act.
Oh, that was supposed
to get money out of politics.
Oh, let me tell you why that's nonsense. I've participated in that process. What that does is it shields the candidate from criticism from negative ads.
Yeah.
You can get your signs. You can purchase your signs, your palm cards, and some of your literature, while the party is assassinating your opponent politically.
Yeah.
That's
what
it comes down to.
We saw that in Troy Jackson's election against Sue Bernard, where he's a clean election candidate, that somehow almost $1 million materializes to just gutter and slime Sue Bernard, who's a lovely woman from a rustic county, and now is a state senator.
She's a demon in the eyes of some.
She was a demon.
That was a manufactured hit piece.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. And that's what I mean by politics. Now, what is happening in this world is that districts now are becoming insulated from changing parties. You get this divide that's going on where you've got rural Republican districts and urban Democrat districts.
Yeah, the gerrymandering, and then the money reinforcing it.
You can be a fence post and win in some districts depending on the makeup of the voters. If you're in Portland, anybody can win as long as you got a D in front of your name.
Yeah.
Well, in some rural districts, the same is true of Republicans. Well, what has happened is there used to be a block in the middle. The thing about a box is if you divide it in two, there's no middle. That's what you have now. You have the urban liberals, and then you have the conservative Republicans, and nobody in the middle, forcing these two sides to come up with a policy representing the whole state. And that's what's wrong in our politics right now. Last night I watched, Senator Stewart from Aroostook tried to get the Senate, the Democrats, to allow a public hearing on the Red Flag Initiative. Senator Daughtry used to be a representative from Brunswick.
I believe that's Senate President Daughtry.
Senate President Daughtry gave the most bizarre description of why she refused to allow that public hearing 3 different times. And what I was watching was you have this urban Brunswick Democrat who just took what is pretty benign. A public hearing's pretty benign. It's just people coming in and giving their opinion.
It's an old thing. It's democracy.
Yeah,
it's a public hearing.
Yeah, and did gymnastics to try to explain why they weren't going to allow a public hearing. That is not governing for the whole state. That's governing for one party, because Senator Carney, who's the Judiciary Chair, is ticked off because I wouldn't back down to her, and I stood up to her. She doesn't want to have a public hearing because she doesn't want the public to hear what's in this red flag referendum. So Daughtry has to protect her caucus member and figure out a way to justify and rationalize not having a public hearing.
So let's set the table for people who are coming to this one fresh. So there's a gun control citizens initiative Maine is, an outlier amongst states because of how easy it is to get ballot referendums. Going back to the Maine Yankee nuclear referendums, you have outside interests, California money, New York money. They come to Maine, they get enough signatures, they get their ballot initiative passed, and then they can go to other states and say, look, Maine's already done it, so we should do it here. So we're like a breeding ground or a petri dish for testing these ideas, mostly progressive ideas.
That's right.
The latest version of that is a lot of money was spent to collect signatures for Maine to adopt a red flag law, an extreme risk protection law, and this is a law that would effectively allow the seizure of an individual's firearms without any due process for a period of time.
That's right.
If a pretty large group of individuals report that they should have their firearms seized. And it would be, I guess, a change or would really abolish our current law, which is a yellow flag law, where there is some due process. And it's been effective and wasn't used in the case of the Lewiston mass shooting, which is being used and leveraged by the proponents of the red flag law. They're they are standing on the corpses of murder victims to push for a bill that would not have prevented the tragedy in Lewiston.
That's correct. The issue with what happened in Lewiston, New York had a red flag law. Robert Card was in New York and should have been red flagged. They didn't use it.
He should have been reported by the U.S. Army. Should have been reported by his law enforcement colleagues who were in his unit.
They were his friends as well. There's something to that, what you just said. If it was you or I that had done those things that Robert Card did, we would have been either yellow flagged or red flagged or probably put in an institution because he was threatening to shoot up a military facility. Yeah. All of these friends...
They were scared enough.
No, I don't think it was scared.
No, I'm saying the Army Reserve was scared enough to put out a bolo basically for him. Yeah. So they thought that he was a threat to them, to a military installation.
Right. But he was surrounded by police officers, deputies, and soldiers that knew that if they had red flagged or yellow flagged him, his job is over.
Yeah.
He can no longer hunt. He can't have firearms. And that's a powerful thing to do to somebody you call a friend.
Yeah.
Can you imagine going into a room of a really good friend and say, I just took your guns away.
Yeah.
You just lost your friend, and you're probably going to get a fat lip, if not worse. My point is that there's a lot more to it than yellow flag, red flag, and what happened in Lewiston. And so these people have come to Maine now. They're the same ones that opposed the law that we have currently from day one. They did everything in their power to block it. It's been used 867 times to help people in crisis. In a comparison, in Massachusetts, they have a red flag law with 5 times our population. It gets used about 7 times a year and rejected 50% of the time by the court. 5 times the population, used 7 times a year, and then those 7 really are reflected in probably 20 applications.
So I mean, even if you're a someone who sincerely wants to reduce incidences of gun violence, whether self-inflicted or inflicted on others, there's a good argument to be made based on Massachusetts versus Maine that the red flag law would be less effective at accomplishing
It would
your
cost
mains.
lives. I'm going to say it right here on your show. People will die if they get their way. And that's why we've been fighting. I've been fighting so hard to get a public hearing. There are police officers that want to come in and say, if you do this, our effective law won't be used as much, and those people in crisis who want to harm themselves are going to do it. So I think it's going to cost lives, and so do some police officers, and so does Senator Carney. She knows this. She knows if these officers come in and say this law is working and it's saving lives, if you do this, it will cost lives. That'll end the red flag referendum right there. They won't pass. If Maine people think it'll make their communities more dangerous, they won't pass it.
And so I guess to clarify the process, there's a law in Maine that says that for every citizens initiative, you're required to have a public hearing.
By state law.
Because of the shenanigans that were pulled to get the budget implemented, which are kind of arcane and complex, there's some debate as to whether that law applies during this new special session that we're currently in. It'll be litigated. We don't need to talk about it. People, the courts can decide that. Yeah. But I think on principle, people would generally agree. We have a law that says you have public hearings related to citizens initiatives. Why aren't we having a public hearing for this citizens initiative when we had one for the voter ID? The world did not end when we had a public hearing for
You
the voter
imagine
ID
the whole-
citizens initiative.
The only part of the system now, because as citizens, when we give up our right to control our laws and we give it to elected people, the only part that we get in the process then is a public hearing and elections. That's how we speak. They're taking away one of those. And then they're manipulating the airwaves so that they can win the second one.
Yeah, with money.
With money. I mean, that's how they're influencing
money buys the airwaves.
It does.
And I'd have to say that they're also the same people who are prancing around wearing shirts that say "Democracy Defender."
I went fishing last night. I took my boat down to the Dutch Neck Landing, and it was these signs along this liberal area of the town said "Save Democracy, Save Democracy." Every one of those is a Democrat home.
Yeah, I mean, how many times did we hear during the last election that democracy was on the ballot?
Well, this is the purest form of democracy, and it's being denied. We're talking with attorneys. They're drafting the challenge. We will take it because whether we win or not, Maine people know in their hearts that having a public hearing on every bill is important. And when you start giving power to politicians who are in elected office in high power positions like Speaker and President of the Senate to decide through chairs which committee bills are heard and which are not, imagine what happens at 2 o'clock in the morning when all of us are sleeping, no public hearing, no idea what's in the bill. Guess what gets passed?
Nothing
gets
good.
Stuffed into the 600-page budget.
Yeah, nothing good.
Nothing good. That's when bad things happen. And so I'm going to put up a fight on this one, and it'll go through the election cycle. We have to. This is truly fighting for democracy, and
and civil rights.
it is.
Civil rights and due process.
That's
like the Second Amendment is a fundamental, I think, God-given human right.
It is,
and you're fighting to remove that from somebody
Yeah.
without due process. And I think that there are unintended consequences of this that maybe haven't been totally examined by even critics, but especially by supporters, because you can easily see how the red flag law could be politically weaponized.
Like in Florida,
somebody shows
Polk
up at
County?
well, we can get into that, but
Yeah.
I mean, somebody shows up at the state house or a school board meeting, and they're angry that the liberals are putting creepy porn books in front of third graders. Well, they were angry at a school board meeting. Maybe they should be red flagged.
Yeah.
We've already had in Cumberland, there were police called on a father who did just that. Came in and held up pictures of books that were being made available. They called the police on him. What's to stop them from red flagging him? And all of a sudden he's going to knock on the door and they're seizing his property from him.
That's why
and that's
they
part of his
want it.
public criminal record that he was red flagged and he might be a risk.
Call it something different. Call it scarlet lettering.
Yeah.
Because really what they're doing is discriminatory too. Part of the red flag is there a possibility you own weapons, guns? So that's the segment.
Which the state should not even know.
Right.
Like,
That's right.
In my view, maybe that's extreme libertarianism, but
this is how
nobody should even know if you own firearms or
Right.
not. They should just assume you do.
And that's how the government finds out that you do, is because somebody in the family, somebody who knows you have a gun case up in your game room. So that's how the government finds out you have them. Now,
So the red flag law also comes with a snitching system, essentially.
it does. And for those that think that, having a family member being able to do a red flag, every one of our current yellow flag, almost every single one of them involved somebody, a family member or a friend, calling the police and saying, Uncle Joe thinks he's a vampire. He accidentally cut himself and he's drinking his own blood. That's literally one of the situations. And so the family member can, but it has to be justified. It can't just be an Orwellian clairvoyant who says, I think in 10 years this guy might commit a crime with a gun. I'm going to sign an affidavit saying go take his guns. This is why it's really bad. For your listeners out there, you can do the research yourself. I did it. I first brought it to the attention of the NRA, and they went national with it. Polk County, Florida. The sheriff down there used red flags over 450 times on children as young as 8 years old.
Come again?
As young as 8 years old.
This is the same law that they're trying to adopt here in Maine.
Correct.
Has been used against children.
In this one county alone, as others in the other counties. But the reason that when he was pressed as to why he was doing it, he said, I want to see if they have guns in the home. It's our way of getting into the home to see if the parents have guns. So you're red flagging possibly 3 people so that the police can get into the home. And you can research yourself online.
And Florida, I know, has a very expansive public records law. It's why there's that stereotype of the Florida man. It's because anytime there's criminal events, it becomes public very quickly.
Right. Juvenile records are not sealed in New York.
Or Florida.
I mean, in Florida, it's going to track that child forever.
If you're on the playground and you get into a tiff with somebody, and a politically motivated sheriff decides to red flag you, that's going to stick with you for the rest of your life.
It is. It's
like
similar.
If they run a criminal background check on you, you try to join the army, you try to work for the government, you try to work anywhere.
Limited. You're limited on what jobs you can hold.
They're going to see, oh, this kid was a psycho when he was a kid.
That's right. Now, there are some activist DAs around the country that George Soros has helped get into office. And
one of them's in Cumberland County, Jacqueline Sartoris.
Well, sheriffs in Maine are elected. Connect the dots here. Yeah. If you've got this red flag law and you've got a sheriff down in Cumberland County that maybe Michael Bloomberg helps get elected, do you think he's going to honor the intent, or is he going to use it to keep himself in office and move an agenda? That's what's happened in California with their district attorneys and around the country. He elects these activists who then use their authority to push a political agenda. That's what scares me. In addition, I was a Maryland man who got red flagged. Police came to his house. No accusation of a crime. No probable cause. Came to his door and said, we need to confiscate your firearms under a red flag order. A shooting happened and the police killed him in his own home. Maine people need to hear that. There's consequences both for the individual being red flagged and the police who have to go there. The police want to say, our law's working, and if you put us in these situations, people are going to get hurt. That's what Senator Carney and President of the Senate are robbing the Maine people of hearing. That's powerful. It should be part of the debate. If they get on TV and we don't, this will be the last time it's heard. And that's a shame. That's not how our system's supposed to work.
So who is the money coming in to fund something like this?
It's
I know
coming from
Bloomberg in every town.
There's a national organization. I lose track of its name.
I know the person. This is just funny. The person who's running the ballot question committee, I think, is an opera singer.
Yeah.
I forget whether soprano or alto, but I'm sure she's very talented.
Yeah, you can go and on the ethics page, and if you're clever enough to find it, they don't make it easy to find. You can find that this international organization funded the signature collection effort.
Yeah, they're paying.
Global Impact Fund, I think.
Yeah,
Global Impact Fund, I think, is the name.
$7 or $8 a signature is what it got down to. Yeah.
So
that's tough. It doesn't demonstrate broad community support, whereas the voter ID initiative that Alex Tickham and Laura Libby ran, I mean, I think they broke the state record for signature collection and spent $25,000 doing a volunteer effort. So.
Yeah, they did an amazing job on that. Real quick, and then I want to get back to the public hearing process because part of my making a stand on the public hearing on this issue goes back to what they've done to the public hearing process entirely, which is non-existent. But getting back to Laura Libby, when Speaker of the House Fectow brought Representative Libby to the well of the House, and he's booming over her, telling her, apologize.
Right out of The Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah. Think about this for a minute, because we learned this as a kid. When mom brings you in and says, hey, you slapped your brother, I want you to apologize. Well, my brother hit me in the eye with a rock. You're going to apologize because you have to? But it's not sincere. We learn as kids that the only apology that matters is the one that's sincere, and you don't have to coerce.
Yeah. Well, and also coerced speech is against the First Amendment is morally repugnant.
Right. Speaker Fectow should have known when you demand an apology or else, a strong-willed person like Representative Libby is going to do like I would have done. I will take the or else, which is what he did to her. He knew that going in, that she was not going to apologize. So we put her in a position where she could not win. And I
think she won.
Ultimately the court.
I think Mr. Fectow, Little Fectow, we call him. I think that he is going to go down in history as a misogynist, someone who silenced a woman and disenfranchised a woman and her constituents in the name of censoring a Facebook post that was critical of a radical, harmful transgender ideology.
That's right. So So let me ask you this. Given what Senator Carney and Representative Kuhn are doing in the Judiciary Committee, and they're obviously violating state law, they refuse to have a public hearing. Which does more damage? Is it the work that they're doing or what happened with Laura Libby? Apply the rules and the laws across the board equally for everyone. If Representative Libby can be censured for what happened, why can't Kuhn and Carney be censured for what they did? And the truth of the matter is because they're in the majority party.
Well, yeah. But I mean, and the same, I think the same principle runs through both what was done to Representative Libby and the attempt to subvert this public hearing, and that is abusing and twisting and torturing well-established procedures in order to create political advantages.
And that's what's dangerous.
It could be. I mean, maybe it started earlier, but it could be a consequence of the late-term abortion fight, when a record number of people turned out to testify against the bill, and they could be looking to avoid a similar spectacle where the rural conservatives organize and come down and testify, or the state police or local police you were talking about come in and give their, I would say, expert perspective on what a red flag law would look like. But again, it's abusing the process in a way that is anti-democratic in order to push an agenda that is supported by people from out of state and I would say a radical fringe minority. Like Ann Carney lives in a multi-million-dollar mansion down on the coast in Cape Elizabeth. And you know what? Her guest house is also a multi-million-dollar mansion. She's living higher on the hog thanks to, she married well. Then I would say 99.999% of people in Maine. I'm not saying that makes her a bad person. People are allowed to be wealthy and live on the coast and have huge guest houses. However, it doesn't give her the same perspective that someone has if they grew up hunting deer, maybe to feed their family.
That's right. Had to struggle to get there. Now, real quick to that point, and I want to get back to the public hearing process. So when all that happened with the abortion issue, I was really frustrated because it wasn't just what happened, leaving site, leaving a vote open forever. That's been going on for a long time. I've tried to fight that when I was a legislator. But what happened to Representative White in Waterville is what bothered me. He was one of the few voices in the middle who was pretty much pro-life as a Democrat. What happened to him?
He was a Catholic Democrat. Yeah. He voted against the late-term abortion bill that ultimately ended up passing.
That's right. And guess what happened to him? Planned Parenthood pumped a whole bunch of money into a Democrat primary and ousted him. That's what bothers me about this process. You cannot be in the middle and demand a policy that represents the entire state. You have to represent the party's position, or guess what? We're going to oust you. And that's what happened to him. And I feel bad because nobody came to his defense. They just let Planned Parenthood come in and wipe him out. And now they've got a pro-life, a pro-abortion Democrat.
I do think maybe the Christian Civic League might have come to support him.
But where was the press? Where were people?
Oh, we covered it. We covered it.
Right, and I think that's why your reporting is going to become more and more popular, and I think even consume some of the press that's out there that can't be subsidized by foundational money. So for those that actually have to survive on making money off of their selling newspapers and their readership, they're going to have a much harder time to do it. But getting back to the public hearing process, when I was first elected, we would have a 2-week notice of every bill that appeared. It'd go on the calendar. 2 weeks later, it'd be scheduled for a public hearing. What happens now? They suspend the legislature, go into special session. They suspend the public hearing process. You'll have a bill printed on a Friday that has a public hearing on a Monday, and then it's possible it could get worked on a Monday afternoon.
Yeah, it could be a concept draft. The title is "This is an act related to water." That was an actual concept draft, an act related to water.
Yeah.
And then it could end up being, basically anything.
That's right.
And so no one has an opportunity to examine it. And again, it keeps keeping with the theme. It limits the
exposure.
The democratic principle is limited. It undermines democracy. It undermines the ability of the people to see how the legislature is working, to see what's going on.
Those policies can be incredibly complex. And under a normal process, like when I passed the state's mandatory reporting system for medical errors, it took 2 years to do it. It was complex policy that needed to be worked. It wasn't that there was obstructionists who delayed it for 2 years. It was incredibly complex, and it needed to be worked. What's happening now is they're putting in these massive bills with no public input, no input really from groups like mine, because, and I'll get to that in a second, Senator Carney limits your testimony on multiple bills to sometimes 2 and 3 minutes. So I come in, I have to introduce myself and read the titles of the bills, and then by then I've already used up half my time, and I don't even get to speak to the bill. So in this scenario, you have no public, the room is empty. Even the lobbyists like myself, representing possibly 300,000 sportsmen in the state, I am limited to a few seconds to say what our concerns are, and then the committee chairs work the bills.
Oh, and in the meantime, they're not even listening to you. They're scrolling through,
they don't
Blue
care.
Sky on their phone or checking their Tinder or something.
I'll tell you what they're doing. They're texting each other. Dave Trahan's an idiot, and why? And they're doing their thing, and you're right. They're ignoring us. Carney turns the committee members against an organization she doesn't agree with in various ways. So what happens is they don't care. They don't even respect your organizations anymore.
Well, I'll say we've even seen similar tactics deployed against other elected officials. I mean, on the Veterans and Legal Affairs Committee, just a few days ago, David Boyer, the ranking member, was just basically told, shut the bleep up and go away by the Democratic chair of that committee. Yeah. And there were no consequences whatsoever other than, a little bit of public embarrassment maybe, so if they're capable of feeling that.
Right. So I'm glad you brought up consequences. Shenna Bellows is running for governor. Okay.
I've heard.
Okay. So I've told you how there's no public hearing on the red flag. We're not going to have the ability to have people come in and testify on the negative implications. Shenna Bellows running for governor. She's the Secretary of State. She gets to write the language of the question. As soon as the question came out that she had drafted, I'm like, oh boy, we got an uphill battle now. Why doesn't she just say that red flag is far superior to yellow flag? Let's pass it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in anytime there's a ballot referendum being written, there's a battle over how the question is going to be written, because it can substantially affect the outcome.
Look at the same day voter.
The voter ID. Yeah, all of them are. I mean, Shenna has, in the most partisan way possible, written those questions in order to affect the outcomes she wants and that her donors want.
That's the important part, okay? I always understood a conflict of interest is not only the conflict of interest itself, but the appearance, okay? Yeah. Shenna Bellows is running for governor. She writes 2 questions to benefit the people who are going to give her money in her campaign and support her. Who is calling her out on a conflict of interest? I don't see anybody, especially who's in the mainstream press is saying, Shenna, you should recuse yourself from this process because you're going to be getting money and support from these same groups you're helping. Okay, so where in the process is there fairness that I've described for you? Public hearing process is gone. Carney refuses to even give us a chance to speak publicly. Secretary of State...
They bought the signatures.
Right, and Shenna Bellows has stacked the deck against us with the question.
And Shenna, I would also say, would be responsible for reviewing the authenticity and legitimacy of the signatures that were paid for. And to get into the weeds of signature collection, when you're paying $7 or $8 a signature, you're creating a pretty strong incentive for somebody to walk through a graveyard and write down some names, so that your signatures are less likely to be legitimate. Some of them get rejected, and they barely met the threshold to get the ballot initiative on. So I'm willing to say that if you scrutinized those petition signatures as closely as the marijuana referendum or the voter ID signatures were scrutinized, you might find something that perhaps the Secretary of State's office missed. But to your point about donations to future gubernatorial campaigns, perhaps she has an incentive not to scrutinize those very closely.
Well, not only that, she controls access to the database of voters in our state. If you're a registered voter, she keeps a database of that, not just in the Secretary of State's office, but in the municipalities, complete access to it. So who's to say who has access to that database and how the information contained within that database is used by the political parties? I can tell you right now that both political parties mine information. One of the biggest databases of individual Maine residents is held by the parties and by the Secretary of State. It is manipulated during election time to benefit one or the other. And if money is your advantage, which party has advantage? Financially and complete access to the data.
Yeah, the access to the data is huge.
It is.
I mean, it's not an accident that in the last election, the Uokava vote, for example, which tilts 8-1 Democrat, was higher than it's ever been. They have ways of exploiting data to boost election turnout in ways that are to their advantage. And I would also say that we filed a Freedom of Access Act request with the Secretary of State's office, one we had to fight for, one that they threw up as many delays as possible. And I know from sources, within state government that they privately laugh about discriminating against my Freedom of Access Act requests because they enjoy blocking, again, democracy, the press access to records. But once we were able to get access to those records, one of the things we got, because we were looking for information about her kicking Trump off the ballot. Right. Again, anti-democratic. Right. There's a theme here is thwarting democracy while pretending to be the defender of democracy. But one of the things we found were her calendar showed that she had regular monthly check-ins with a group called Democracy Maine, which is a collection of the Arabella, dark money, left-wing groups like the Maine People's Alliance, League of Women Voters, Maine Citizens for Clean Elections, Maine Conservation Voters. So what does it take for this cabal of left-wing billionaire-funded organizations to get a standing monthly meeting with the Secretary of State in Maine? And what's the purpose of that? What benefit are they getting? What data is flowing into their organizations?
Well,
what are they giving the Secretary of State in return?
My bigger issue is who's the watchdog here to make sure that these systems that the public should be trusting, our election cycles should be trusted universally. There's always going to be a few people who don't trust it. Besides the work that you're doing, who out there is questioning this stuff? Who's holding Shenna Bellows accountable? Who's holding Senator Carney accountable? Who is making sure our system of voting is being held accountable? It's the same people that are in power. And that's the part that's frustrating me when you see the public hearing process turned into nothing but a kangaroo court, because that's what's happened. It doesn't have any value. And let me tell you why, for your listeners, why it doesn't have any value. There's no money in the people that are sitting in that room and the time spent. There's no political connections to, say, a citizen coming from Aroostook County to testify on a coyote bill in IF&W. There's no money there. The money's in all of those bills stacked up behind you that aren't getting public hearings and the political groups behind them who want their agenda to be promoted. In the next election, the more of these you pump through, the more money and support you get from the same liberal groups. Either we open up this system so that the public has as much input as the special interest groups and those that are being funded from out of state, or we've lost our democracy. I wrote a column, and you printed it. It hasn't been printed anywhere else yet. It's going to likely be about the death of democracy. It begins with the public's input into the process. It's now that process is being run by big money, and it's to keep them in power, and that's what scares me the most. Now, this interview is probably going to get me beat up pretty hard at the State House. Got to be honest with you, for those people who do that, that doesn't intimidate me. Don't bother. Doesn't scare me. A tree falling, spinning on the stump, and trying to kill me scares me more than what they're going to do. Defend what I just said. You go out there and you question what I just said, and you tell me why I'm wrong. And if you can't do that, don't bother with the death threats. Don't bother with the intimidation. That's not going to work with me.
I mean, just asking for a public hearing doesn't seem like it's.
How's that working?
It doesn't seem like it's a huge ask. You know, you're not asking them to vote a certain way. You're not asking to cancel a referendum.
How's that working for them?
Well,
now brought
they'll get their way.
They've brought the attention of the National Rifle Association National, Sportsmans Alliance of Maine, and Gun Owners of Maine. When I did an appeal for the money to challenge it, within an hour I had enough money to challenge it because there are people paying attention. They're frustrated. They're sitting in their, in their office on their computer and they're reading what's happening, and they're getting frustrated. And the only way they can get out their frustration is to send us a check and to challenge it in court. That's not good governance.
Yeah, and
but
I mean,
it has to be done.
And I think other people who might not be, entering the moose lottery every single year understand that if the democratic process can be subverted on a gun control issue, it can be subverted on a tax issue, or every issue, whatever issue it is, lobstering, or anything that you hold dear. This same thing can happen. They can subvert the democratic process in order to accomplish the will of a fringe minority.
Let's get back to the abortion issue that took Representative White out in Waterville. When that policy was debated, the individual legislators had the courage in the moderates to bring forward amendments that better reflected the will of the entire state of Maine, not just South Portland or Cape Elizabeth.
Or the abortion clinics
Right.
that are going to be making a whole bunch of money,
Right.
doing abortions.
That's right. So what would have happened is if the process had been allowed to work with honor, to follow the rules, to let people vote the way they wanted, you would have a more moderate policy. We wouldn't have one of the most extreme abortion laws in the country. In my political world, my personal feelings oftentimes didn't get reflected in the policies I promoted. Because ultimately, I think the policy that works best is the one that represents the broadest majority of people across the state. Well, what happens when you don't do that is, I'm sorry, but you piss off a lot of people.
Yeah.
You make them angry. They say, well, I'm not going to vote anymore because it doesn't matter. Well, that's the worst thing you can do. If you don't vote, the other side wins automatically.
Yeah, it becomes a negative feedback loop.
It does.
I mean, you see that with specifically on the late-term abortion bill, where you have thousands and thousands of predominantly evangelical Christians turning out to oppose this. Not all. There were Muslims. There were I'm sure some secular people turning out to oppose that. But they say, we just broke the state record for turning out to testify against a piece of legislation, and they went ahead and rammed it through anyways by just a couple of votes, after the governor, by the way, during her campaign said, I'm not going to support any changes to Maine's current abortion law. So the people who made that sacrifice to participate in the democratic process are like, well, what good is it to go drive to Augusta and testify if all of these decisions are being made in the offices of the Democratic leaders, the majority leaders?
You know what is missing in this process is fear. It used to be, when I was growing up, if somebody in the legislative process, like, say, John Martin, abused his speakership, the press hammered him. There were stories that came out about how he abused it, right? Is that happening? Did it happen with Shenna Bellows? Did it happen with this issue? There wasn't an outcry. There was no punishment or no fear associated with doing these things. Without the fourth branch of government, which is the free press, with the courage to speak up and tell the truth, whether you agree with it or not, the reporter themselves or the editorial writer, there's no fear for the politicians to do the right thing.
And there's less shame, too, on the part of the politicians, I would say.
Yeah.
There's no sense of there's no feeling of shame at having undermined democratic values.
That's right.
It's they're proud to have just gotten their way.
That's
right. It's a the ends justify the means kind of thing, and they're so convinced of their moral righteousness, whether it's the gun control issue or any social issue. They've convinced themselves that they're almost like on a holy jihad. So why question them? Their prerogatives are more important than what the state constitution says or what the traditions of the state house have typically allowed.
What are the consequences? There are none. The consequences here are you'll get more money in your next election and you'll rise up to the next level in politics.
Yeah. Well, I would say I would challenge anybody to show me any measure of social science or economic science by which Maine has improved over the last 6-7 years. What's gotten better? Progressives have had total control of the state legislature. During the COVID years, it was basically like a one-person government, really, as close as you can get to a dictatorship. Municipal government, the progressives have never been more powerful. Culturally, the media, they've never been more powerful. So what's gotten better in Maine? Or is it crime, obesity, medical outcomes, drug addiction, prosperity, self-reported happiness, income, wealth,
Sadly,
jobs created? What has gotten better in the state of Maine?
Sadly, I don't know, but I will say this, that over that 50 years of my life, I'm going to be 63 in my next birthday, and I'm getting close to retirement. When I look over that period of time, that 50 years that Sam existed in my life, when you transpose it over that time period, our world here in Maine has dramatically changed. It was a place everyone wanted to come. This quality of life that was here, this beautiful environment, this ability for the individual in a state with only 1 million people to make a difference in their government has changed dramatically. And we're becoming more and more like Washington politics, where everything is driven by money and power. And you know what? Rural versus urban is getting worse.
Yeah, Washington politics or Mogadishu politics or Bangladeshi politics, Beijing
It's
politics.
going to take some courageous leaders to turn this around, and I'm not 100% sure you can turn it around, given the amount of money and influence that's going on. And this really comes down to the voters. You see these polls all the time, how voters don't trust their Congress, they don't trust their elected officials, but it doesn't translate into a switch at election time. The same people are getting elected. How in the world?
Yeah, they hate Congress, but they vote for their congressperson.
And it goes on both parties. How do these long-term politicians stay in office when there's so much frustration against them? They're all getting rich. They're all controlling power. They're all ticking off the public, but they keep getting in there. And until somebody with intense moral values and courage stands up and says, I'm going to fight against this, I'm going to push back, and you will never influence me no matter how hard you try, until that person emerges or people emerge, it's going to stay the same.
And is that why you're running for governor?
No. One of the things that I like is being a freewheeler. I'm in a position now where I can speak. My board supports me speaking. I can cause more change where I am, criticizing just like I am right now. Once you're a governor, you're going to be spread so thin. You're going to have thousands of issues and divisions of people that you have to fight with every day. You're going to get so diluted in a position like that, it's going to be hard to make change. You need somebody willing to call a spade, tell the truth in an environment where they can. You know how many, I would share this story with you because it took an act of courage by a Democrat chair of a committee. Well, 3 years ago, this individual, a lady, called me and said, I was just part of a gun control caucus meeting in which your name was specifically raised. And the theme was, in order to get gun control, we had to take this guy out of the picture. I said, well, thank you for tipping me off to that, but it's not going to change anything. And it hasn't. But look over the last 3 years.
First of all, I mean, what does that even mean, take you out of the picture?
Well, it means politically, my organization and I, because of my effectiveness as a legislator, and then
are they going to slime you? Are they going to hire a private investigator to follow you around and see you catching a short trout or something?
Well, I think it translates into this. In order for the chairs of the Judiciary Committee to undermine Sam's testimony, I'll give you an example. Representative Sachs got up from Freeport, got up and lied 6 different times about my organization. I was shaking my head, no, this isn't true. My staff was. The Republicans on the committee wanted me to come up and correct the record in the work session on that bill. Senator Carney fought them and would not let me get up on the podium and correct the record.
And respond to direct criticism.
That's right. In addition, at another work session, I'm sitting there, and in comes a police officer, a security officer, comes right over next to me and stands next to me. And I go, what in the world is this? I'm sitting here talking to Justin Davis, a well-respected lobbyist for the NRA. And he's like, well, I'm here. There was a complaint against you. And I said, what do you mean?
You got red flagged.
I said, well, what do you mean a complaint? Yeah. And come to find out, I had to get it through another source, that when I was talking about the repeal of the 72-hour law with Justin prior to the board meeting, I said that this bill could get messy. So a member of the committee called security and said, I'm afraid of this guy. He's a gun rights guy, and he just said this could get messy. And they translated that into a threat. So I said to
these are the same people, by the way, who are carrying around 8647 signs and say that those aren't violent threats.
Yeah.
So it's very convenient that they would say, messy is a violent threat.
Yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I oftentimes I try to stay away from the State House because it's so disgusting and I don't like the smell of all their halitosis. But I find that oftentimes police officers will just randomly show up to accompany me when
it's not random.
I've never done anything except for laugh at these people because I think they're silly, mean, and dumb.
But it's a way to intimidate, though, and it's also a way to scare your fellow caucus members on the committee.
Yeah,
that this guy said something I didn't like.
Yeah,
we got to get security. Well, I know these security guys. I've known them for years.
Well, they're Maine wire readers too.
Oh, well, they may be, but they're good guys too.
They are.
So you know what I said to him? I said, well, why don't you sit down next to me? I love to see you in here. I have no fear of you, and I don't have any intimidation.
Exactly.
I love you guys. I feel comfortable when you're around. But it's that type of systematic destruction of credibility that I'm concerned with. Yeah. When you start doing stuff like that, that's pretty desperate. Yeah. After the Lewiston shooting, I got a series of death threats. Pretty significant to the point where I had to change security at my facility for my staff. The one in particular that really frightened me the most was this one man said that I was responsible for the shooting, and this was when Robert Card was still out and they were searching for him.
They thought he was at large, but he was actually 50 feet away from where he'd abandoned his car, and where for some reason they didn't have a dog sniff him down.
That's right.
No, not to raise other issues, but...
So I got this message, and I sent it on to the FBI and to the state police, public safety. I hope Robert Card comes to your house and shoots you in the face. If I had the ability to get in a cage with you, I'd beat you to death with my bare hands. Okay, that's a pretty serious threat. But it becomes common now that when people don't agree with you, you get these subtle death threats or outright death threats. My point is that in a democracy and in a free society, people have to be comfortable to debate, bring out facts, talk about issues. That's not what's happening now. The assault on democracy is silencing the First Amendment. And if these reporters out there don't understand that fundamentally, whether you're funded by George Soros or anybody else, your job, you have to tell the truth. You have to let people debate in a way in which all the information is heard. That's how you get good policy. That's not what's happening now. There is a chilling effect going on with anyone in public office. If we don't like what you're doing, then I will threaten you, I will intimidate you, and you will shut up.
You'll lose your next election. You'll be stripped of your committee assignments.
Yep.
Those aren't as severe as threats of violence, but we've heard of Democratic lawmakers leaving their caucuses are required to sign forms indicating which way they're going to vote on a given legislation if there's a House session.
You
or a
remember
Senate
what
session.
I told you, Josh Carty, on
names.
a note?
Yeah.
Remember what I told you?
I don't think that happens.
That's
on the left.
What's ironic about that is these caucus members elect these people to lead them.
Yeah.
If an elected leader told me I had to tell them how I was going to vote prior to leaving a room, there would be a ruckus and security would get called, because that's bull.
Mm-hmm.
That's just, but it's also an indication that people are willing to give up their independence.
It's really embarrassing.
Freedom of thought.
It's really embarrassing for the Democratic lawmakers.
Well, how many times have I seen
that they're getting bossed around by a little 5'4" guy?
Well, it's also
just a little tyke.
Legislators leave the chamber and not vote. I've seen legislators crying when they've come out of these meetings.
Senator Rebecca Millett, at least I think she's senator now. She's one of the ones that's flipped back and forth between the House and the Senate in order to, I guess, get around term limits.
Mm-hmm.
But she's, I think, voted one way on an education committee bill, and they stopped, corner caucus, come back, redo the vote. She votes the opposite way. Mm. And she was one who was, I was told, in tears over it.
Yeah.
So even people who have been in the legislature for a considerable period of time are subjected to those kinds of pressures. I mean, how embarrassing and destructive for your that can't be good
Well,
for your that can't be good for your soul,
I was
right?
just going to say it affects your soul. It
Yeah.
takes out your core. What enforces your soul is when you tell that person to stuff it.
Yeah.
You don't represent my district. You don't vote for me. So take your little intimidation bullshit and take a walk.
So having been in the legislature, as an elected official, but also, kind of stalking the halls, why don't they? Like, what's different about today's generation of Democratic lawmakers than the John Martins, or even, there are other Democratic lawmakers.
There's been some courageous people that have done that. They've stood up.
Yeah, Bruce White stood up.
Well, they get singled out.
Yeah.
They get ostracized. They get threatened with a committee assignment. We're gonna primary you. Part of the problem is that some of these groups now have created cliques of groups where the environmental groups are in with the Maine People's Alliance and a whole bunch of immigration groups. Together, they agree to support each other's principles.
Call it intersectionality.
Yes, that's it. And so you have these giant groups that everyone knows are aligning with one party, okay? You tell that legislator, hey, look, the coalition to elect whatever, progressives, is going to oppose you and put up a primary against you. And then you're looking at all these groups and the influence that they have in your community. You're done. So they purge out all the independent-minded people who will stand up to them. That's how they get rid of them.
And then in some cases just elect outright employees of these organizations, whether it's the Maine People's Alliance with Senator
right.
Tipping, and
Yeah, that's right.
there's a representative that they have as well now, or Gateway Community Services, a private business that's totally government funded. They've got a representative, so they put their own people right into those positions. And it's always struck me as odd that somebody can work as a full-time employee of a 501c4 organization that is explicitly about influencing politics and simultaneously serve as an elected official. And I've looked this up and down. Maine's ethics laws allow that, and I think are weak comparative to some other states. And I know that, or I think you were involved in the creation of OPEGA.
Yes, the government oversight
the government oversight committee. That it's basically like what amounts for our legislative watchdog.
Yes,
they're investigating
7 years of my work, sometimes alone, sometimes standing up to very abusive President of the Senate, Bev Daggett, Libby Mitchell. Yeah. And got that created. I also got the cameras in the legislature to try to bring accountability. At the time, I got a bill passed through state and local because of what we were talking about earlier. I wanted the cameras to show people being intimidated, pulled out of their seat, arm twisted, crying. That's the people's body. They should know what's going on. I actually tried to pass some rule changes to not allow leadership at the time of roll call to intimidate legislators into changing their vote. All fell on deaf ears. The cameras did get in. OPEGA got created, but not without 7 years of fighting tooth and nail to get it.
So I guess where I was going with the question is, we have OPEGA.
Yeah.
We have the Maine Ethics Commission, but it also seems like we have a significant lack of government oversight and a significant lack of ethics. What do you think could be done to strengthen the ability of the Government Oversight Committee to investigate things like, Matt Dunlap, who you've known for a long time. The state auditor's report shows that $2.1 billion in spending in fiscal year 2024 just had no guardrails,
Right.
completely circumventing the processes around no bid contracts, handing money out willy-nilly. There's not going to be an investigation into that. Yeah. Gateway Community Services, which I just mentioned, there's a whistleblower who's come forward and said that they've been improperly billing Medicaid for more than 5 years. There won't be an investigation into that unless it's the feds or Trump. The OPEGA certainly won't touch that. And it seems like you've got situations where lawmakers, are engaged in behavior that you would say on its face is unethical, or at least creates the perception of an ethical problem.
Right.
But it seems like there's no movement afoot to strengthen government oversight or to improve the state's ethics laws.
I'll answer your question. The reason that Matt Dunlap's report, which by the way is a federally mandated single audit, it's described as a mile-high, inch-thick look at how federal money is distributed. That's mandated by federal government. That's what Matt was doing. Those reports have always been there. They're sitting on a shelf collecting dust. And for the first time, somebody actually looked at them and reported on it. So what has happened? Now the focus is on that, and these agencies are spending that money that way are going, oops, business as usual has got to change. That's accountability.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, as we're the only outlet that's reported on it. You know, the Bangor Daily News reprinted a Maine public broadcasting story about it that didn't even get into any of the details, and they haven't done a story about it.
Well, I bet you that Matt Dunlap got some criticism.
I'm sure
I'll bet you he got blistered for it.
I'm sure he did, but he was doing his job.
He was doing his federally.
It was a tepidly written auditor's report. It's not like there's room for opinion editorializing in an auditor's report. You
know how you asked how do you change it? Opega has never increased in size since it was created. It's a small little entity that, for purposes of accountability, sounds good. But when you realize that they can only look at a handful of programs a year, there's no way that they can. It's like throwing a rock in the ocean.
Yeah.
It makes a ripple for a minute, but that's all you can do. You can't change the direction of the ocean. You need a more independent, pull them right out of the legislature. That was one of the things Bev Daggett did. She wanted and insisted that it be a legislative function. It shouldn't be. It should be an independent function.
Almost like Inspector General or something like that.
It was the way I framed it at the time, and why it took so long is I designed it that way. To be independent, to have access to confidential information, and to not be influenced by politicians. Well, there was a tug of war, and I think that I achieved most of that. But if you want it to be more effective, double its size, pull them out, have a public process to bring forward complaints, where state workers, by the way, when I was creating it, I had more complaints from state workers than anyone else. They go to work, they do their job, the person next to them doesn't, they're doing things they shouldn't be. I got those complaints all the time. Mm-hmm. Allow state workers to have input. The worst possible thing for an administrator is when people working for them go back to Opega and say, hey, they're wasting a whole bunch of money over here.
Well, I'll tell you, if Opega is not paying attention to those state employees' concerns, they can always send me an email, robinson@themainewire.com. We'll look into every single one of those. I also think on the ethics front, there's a situation where Senator Mike Tipping, who I'm sure is a good person, works for the Maine People's Alliance, also a full-time state senator. It's a group that's explicitly, funded by dark money trying to pass this agenda. I think for a lot of people that raises like an ethical conundrum. Yeah. Could you in theory just have an entire Senate controlled by people who are on the payroll of anonymous billionaires? Yeah, you could. That would be okay in terms of the ethics we have right now. And you also have former Senate President Troy Jackson. During his time in office, he was employed by a 501c4 called Food and Medicine. That was the name of his primary employer. Or maybe there's a union that he did some work for as well. But as a 501c4 organization, they can accept anonymous, unlimited donations. So there's really nothing that would have stopped someone who wanted a bill moved through the Senate from cutting a check for $50,000, $100,000, $1 million to Food and Medicine, and Food and Medicine paying that over to Troy. There's nowhere that would be reported. And I'm not alleging that happened, but it could have.
That's right.
And no one would know about it, and it wouldn't be illegal because of how loose Maine's ethics laws are.
You need a more independent ethics commission board. And what happens is people from both parties get appointed to that board. I'm not saying that they're dishonest people, but if I make a complaint that something is happening with a legislator or a conflict, they don't have the power to enforce that.
That's what it is. Yeah, I think Jonathan Wayne, the executive director of the commission, is a great guy, high integrity.
Yes,
just doesn't have the authority.
He doesn't,
and he recognized exactly. It's like, well, yeah. Why would they? The legislator wants to give him the authority to police what they're doing.
The best, from my perspective, the best level of accountability is the fourth branch of government, the press, being truly independent. Doesn't make any difference what party you're from, who you are. If you do something wrong, you call them out for it, and you put that information out into the public. Let the public be the watchdog. If that information is accurate and out there, at the next election, guess what? There's some pain.
Yeah.
There's some accountability.
couldn't agree with you more. I mean, frankly, that's why I do what I do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that the investigative journalism and adversarial journalism, not advocacy journalism, like trying to root for some bill or some politician.
You mean like the Portland Press Herald is doing
Well, exactly.
with the red flag
Yeah,
referendum?
I mean, it's very obvious what the Maine Trust for Local News is trying to sandbag or is trying to promote this referendum. But there's a lot of, you know, just kind of like namby-pamby promoting politicians type journalism, so-called, but just adversarial journalism that questions power, whether it's corporate power or political power, I think is really important. And I root for the other outlets in the state to become more aggressive and more, even if you're just going after conservatives, like I wish they would summon the spirit they had when Governor LePage was in office. You remember how aggressive everybody was when they were in his face with microphones, they were chasing him down, they were trying, you know, digging through his dumpster. Like when have they ever done that to Janet Mills? You know, the first time she saw an aggressive reporter was after the Lewiston shooting, when the national media showed up and a CNN reporter started questioning. It's like the first and only time she's ever seen the treatment that Governor LePage got for 8 years. So, I mean, I would, you know, I wish the best for the other outlets in the state, because, you know, the more people you have watching and the more people you have investigating and the more aggressive you are, the better that's going to be for everybody. And people can pick and choose their information, decide for themselves. If they think, you know, I'm a right-wing conservative hack, fine. But I mean, records are records, statements are statements, interviews are interviews. You know, you can listen to long-form conversations like this and make up your own mind about who's telling the truth on an issue. And I would say I'll invite Nicole Palmer, the executive director of the Maine Coalition to take
Gun Safety Coalition.
I would invite her to come in and we can have this same exact conversation. And
maybe
she could make a good case for it.
Well, maybe she should start calling herself a gun control activist instead of a professor at the university or whatever the heck she calls herself. That's misleading to people. Yeah. She is not working for the university when she's promoting an agenda. She's working for the Gun Safety Coalition. Yeah. But the chairs of the committee allow her to be an expert witness, to come up and, no, she's an activist. She's a lobbyist just like I am, except she's treated differently. Now, getting back to the accountability component, if people stopped buying in subscriptions to these outlets and said, I'm not going to buy it until you give me a product. I don't want the fluff. I want hard hitting articles about my government. We don't trust our government anymore. Why don't you help us build a new government that we can trust? And you never will, because when there's money involved, there's always going to be a level of this activity, corruption, whatever, misuse of power. But the more powerful the light is on that system, the more honest it's going to be.
Yeah, there will always be wolves, but that's why you have sheepdogs.
That's right. My point to this whole thing is over a lifetime, you learn a lot. You see history made, you see mistakes made, and in your life you have the ability, particularly at the end of your life in the last 15, 20 years, you can take your experience and you can use it for change. I'm going to try to use my position and knowledge to make positive change. Now, if the press and others, outside of what I think you're doing, if we all committed to that, imagine how much change you could have, positive change. And that's why I'm going to kind of stay where I am and just keep talking and saying what I believe is the truth.
Well, we'll have to do this again sometime. I appreciate your time talking with us, David Trahan. Thank you very much.
Thank you.